The water in the bucket was ice cold and filthy, but the chill in Clara's heart was deeper. On her knees, she scrubbed the worn floorboards of the Vance farmhouse, the rough grain biting into her skin through the thin cloth of her rag. Outside, a relentless gray rain fell, mirroring the endless gray of her life. At 22, she was the ghost in her own home, the only daughter, the only Omega, a whisper in a house of shouts. A heavy boot prodded her side, not hard enough to bruise, just enough to remind her of her place. She didn't flinch. She knew the scent, stale ale and cheap cologne. Her eldest brother, Cale. "You missed the spot," his voice grumbled, a low thunder in the quiet room. Clara merely shifted and scrubbed harder, the rhythmic sound her only reply. Arguing was a luxury she couldn't afford. Pleading was a currency long devalued. "Leave her, Cale. We need to go." The second voice was lighter, laced with a nervous energy. Lorcan, the middle brother. He was Cale's shadow, but a shadow that twitched and glanced at doors as if expecting monsters. "Get up," Cale commanded, his tone leaving no room for the affection a brother might have. "Go wash your face. Put on the white dress in the attic, the one Mother wore." Clara's hand stilled. The rag dripped murky water onto the wood. Slowly, she looked up, pushing a strand of dull brown hair from her forehead. Her eyes, a startling and unusual shade of amethyst, met his. In this dim light, they seemed to hold the only color in the world. "The white dress? But it's freezing, and it was for ceremonies." Her voice was soft, worn thin from disuse. Cale's lips twisted into something that wasn't a smile. "Today is a ceremony, little sister. We're finally settling our account with the Iron Fang Syndicate, and you're going to help us." A cold, sharp dread, colder than the well water, pierced Clara's stomach. The Iron Fang Syndicate wasn't just a group of loan sharks. They were the financial tentacles of the Shadowcrest's pack, and everyone, from the highest alpha to the lowest omega in their tiny, failing Silvermane pack, knew the stories of Shadowcrest. They were wolves of legend, of whispered fear, immensely wealthy, brutally efficient, and utterly merciless. Their territory was a fortress of modern steel and ancient stone, and their alpha, a king named Lysander Vane, was spoken of in tones reserved for natural disasters. "I don't have any money, Cale," Clara whispered, the tremor in her voice betraying her calm. "No," Lorcan said from the doorway, unable to look at her. He was checking his watch, a nervous tick. "But you have other value." Cale reached down, his grip like iron manacles closing around her upper arm, and hauled her to her feet. "We found a buyer for you. A one-time offer, clears our debts, and leaves enough to start fresh." The word hung in the damp air, ugly and final. Sold. It was an abomination, outlawed by the High Council decades ago. But out here, in the forgotten wilds where pack law frayed and money talked louder than morality, old horrors sometimes woke up. "You can't," Clara breathed, the world tilting. "I'm your sister." "You're a burden," Cale roared, his patience snapping, his face inches from hers. The smell of his anger was sour. "An omega who can barely call her wolf, a weak link. You eat our food, take up space, and contribute nothing. But the Shadowcrest Alpha, he's looking for household staff, servants, or maybe just sport." A cruel glint entered his eyes. "Either way, he's paying $50,000 for you. 50,000, Clara. That's freedom for us." Household staff. The phrase was a frail raft in her churning terror. A servant. She could be a servant. She had been one here her whole life. Finally, Lorcan met her gaze, his own filled with a shame so profound it looked like sickness. "The exchange is at the old stone bridge in 1 hour. Get changed." "If you try to run," Cale added, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper as he leaned close, "I will break both of your knees before I hand you over. A crippled servant is still a servant. Now move." The ride to the bridge was a journey in a coffin on wheels. The truck's heater was broken, blasting frigid air that seeped through the thin, vintage white silk of her mother's dress. Clara sat rigid between her brothers, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were bone white. She didn't look at the familiar, dying landscape of Silvermane territory, rolling past. She stared ahead, memorizing the crack in the windshield, trying to anchor herself to something. Anything. The stories of Lysander Vane played in her mind on a cruel loop. They said he was a giant of a man, that he'd silenced the challengers for his throne with a silence that was permanent. They said his eyes were the color of winter frost, and that he had no mate because his wolf was too savage, too ancient to bond with a mere she-wolf. He was a storm given flesh, and she was being delivered to the eye of it. "Here," Cale grunted, pulling the truck onto the gravel shoulder. The old stone bridge arched over a churning, rain-swollen river, marking the absolute end of Silvermane. On the far side, the forest was darker, the pines taller and closer together, Shadowcrest territory. And waiting were two vehicles that looked less like cars and more like armored beasts, black, sleek, and silent. 3 figures stood in front of the headlights, silhouetted against the gloom. They didn't stand like wolves lounging, they stood like soldiers at attention. "Get out," Cale ordered. Clara's legs were lead. Lorcan opened his door, and the roar of the river and the drumming rain filled the cab. Cale shoved her, and she spilled into the mud, the pristine white silk instantly sucking up the brown filth. The cold was a physical shock. She gasped, scrambling to her feet, the dress clinging to her legs. "Walk," Cale said, gripping her elbow and marching her onto the bridge. Lorcan trailed behind, a silent, guilty ghost. A man detached from the group on the Shadowcrest's side and walked to meet them in the middle. He was tall, with a severe, handsome face and a calm demeanor that was more terrifying than a scowl. He carried a simple aluminum briefcase. "Cale and Lorcan Vane, you have the asset?" "He said she's here," Cale said, pushing Clara forward a step. She stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the wet stone. The man's eyes, a sharp hazel, flicked over her. He took in her shivering form, the mud-stained dress, the wild fear in her amethyst eyes. His expression didn't change. "She seems fragile." The agreement specified good health. "She's strong," Cale insisted, a desperate edge in his voice. "Works hard, doesn't complain. She's untouched. That has to count for something." Clara felt a humiliation so complete it burned away the last of the cold. She was a thing, its specifications being haggled over. She looked at the man, a silent plea in her eyes. He ignored it. He simply held out the briefcase. 50,000, as agreed. If there are any problems, if she is not as advertised, the consequences will return to you, with interest. Cale snatched the case, popping the latches. The sight of the neatly banded stacks of cash made his eyes gleam. He didn't look at Clara, not a glance. "Pleasure doing business," he muttered, already turning. "Cale!" The scream was torn from her throat, raw and ragged. Her brothers didn't turn back. They ran to their truck, the engine snarling to life, and sped away, their tires spraying gravel. They vanished into the silver curtain of rain, leaving her utterly alone. The sob that escaped her was swallowed by the storm. The tall man sighed, a faint sound of professional annoyance. He stepped forward and took her arm, his grip firm but not cruel. "Up you get, the Alpha dislikes delays." He led her, numb and stumbling, toward the black vehicles. As he opened the rear door, he finally spoke again. "My name is Silas. You will ride with me. Do as you're told, and your life will be tolerable." Clara crawled into the cavernous back seat. The interior was warm, smelling of clean leather and something crisp, like snow and evergreen. It was the sense of immense, disciplined power. Silas tossed a thick gray wool blanket over the seat to her. "Don't ruin the leather." Clara pulled the blanket around her, her shivering beginning to slow in the warmth. "Where are they taking me?" "To the Eyrie, Alpha Vane's citadel." "Is he going to kill me?" The question was a mere breath. The driver, a mountain of a man, let out a short, humorless sigh. Silas shot him a look. "Your fate is not my concern, Miss Vance, but Alpha Vane was a creature of order. He requested an Omega for specific duties within his household. Why your brothers chose to interpret that as a sale is their shame. You are now a ward of Shadowcrest. Obedience is your only path to peace." The word ward was a small, unexpected kindness. It wasn't slave, it wasn't property, it was a thread, and she clung to it. The journey was an ascent into another world. The dense, ancient forests of Shadowcrest rose around them, the trees seeming to watch their passage. Then, as they rounded the final bend, she saw it. The Eyrie wasn't a house, It was a pinnacle of dark glass and obsidian stone, built into the very face of a granite cliff, overlooking a valley shrouded in mist. Waterfalls cascaded down the rock beside it, their roar a distant thunder. It was breathtaking and terrifying, a castle for a dragon. The garage they entered was underground, lit with cool blue light, harboring vehicles that looked like sculptures. Silas led her to a glass-walled elevator, and as it rose, Clara's stomach dropped. They emerged into a vast, silent hall. The floor was polished black slate, reflecting the gloomy light from floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the raging storm outside. The ceiling soared into shadows. "Wait here," Silas instructed. "Do not move. I will inform Alpha Vane of your arrival." He vanished through an archway, leaving her utterly alone in the immense space. She stood like a misplaced statue, a stain of mud and misery on the perfect, austere beauty. The silence was a living thing.
Time seemed to stop in the art-filled room. The only sounds were the frantic drumming of Clara's heart and the distant, muted roar of the storm outside. Lysander Vane did not move, but his stillness was that of a predator in the instant before the pounce. The silver of his eyes seemed to brighten, a molten metallic glow that held her frozen. He took another step, then another, closing the distance between them with a slow, deliberate grace that was more terrifying than a charge. Clara could only stare, her back pressed against the edge of a heavy oak table. She was trapped. He stopped mere inches away. The heat radiating from his body was immense, like standing near a furnace. He smelled of frost-kissed pine, iron, and something deeply wild, an essence that spoke of ancient forests and untamed power. It was nothing like the sour, desperate scents of Silvermane. This was the scent of a king. His gaze was a physical touch, tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone, lingering on her wide amethyst eyes. He raised a hand, and Clara flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, for the grip that would crush. It never came. Instead, she felt the rough pad of his thumb gently brush a smudge of dried mud from her cheek. The touch was startling in its delicacy. Her eyes flew open. "Open your eyes," he commanded again, his voice a low rumble that resonated in her chest. It was not a request, but the harsh edge was gone, replaced by a bewildered urgency. She was already looking at him, her breath coming in shallow, terrified pants. He was studying her as if she were a complex equation he was finally solving, his gaze flickering between her face and the portrait over her shoulder. "The scent," he murmured, almost to himself. His thumb still rested against her skin. "Wild lilac and frost. It's exactly the same." "What are you talking about?" Clara's voice was a thread of sound. "Who are you? Why do you have these pictures of me?" A tremor, subtle but undeniable, passed through the hand near her face. He lowered it, but his presence still caged her. "For 10 years," he said, the words measured, heavy with a weight she couldn't comprehend. "I have closed my eyes and seen a face, a woman with eyes the color of twilight. Sometimes she is laughing in a field I have never visited. Sometimes she is weeping by a window that does not exist in this house." He gestured sharply to the canvases around them. "I thought it was a madness, a curse of my bloodline. I painted to excise the phantom from my mind, but the phantom never left." He looked directly at her, his silver gaze piercing. "And now she stands before me, smelling of rain and fear, brought to my door by fools who thought they were selling a servant." His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Who brought you here?" The story spilled out of her in a fractured, desperate rush. "My brothers, Cale and Lorcan Vance of the Silvermane Pack. They owed money to the Iron Fang Syndicate. They said you needed an Omega for household duties. They sold me for $50,000. They left me on the bridge." She wrapped her arms around her, the blanket of shock beginning to shred, leaving raw, shaking horror in its wake. Please, I'll work. I'll clean. I'll do anything. Just don't. Silence. The word was soft, but it cut through her panic like a blade. He was no longer looking at her with confusion, but with a dawning, terrifying certainty. Your brothers, he repeated, the name tasting like poison. They traded you like livestock. Before she could respond, the library doors burst open. Silas and two other guards rushed in, their faces tight with alarm. Alpha, she slipped away from the foyer. We'll remove her for processing immediately. Get out. Lysander didn't turn. He didn't raise his voice, but the two words held the force of a thunderclap. The air pressure in the room plummeted. I saw the guards physically recoil, their heads bowing instinctively, submitting to the sheer dominance in the command. Sir, the protocols for new wards, Silas tried, his voice strained. Get out. This time, the Alpha's voice shifted, layered with a guttural, inhuman timbre, the voice of the wolf within. The windows rattled in their frames. The guards practically fell over themselves retreating, pulling the door shut with a soft, final click. The silence they left behind was even heavier than before. Lysander turned his full attention back to Clara. He saw the struggle on his face now, the shock receding, replaced by a storm of other emotions, a furious, protective rage, and beneath it, a vulnerable, aching wonder that was somehow more frightening than his anger. You are not a ward, he stated, the words leaving no room for argument. You are not a servant. He reached out, and this time his hands closed gently around her upper arms. His touch was searing through the thin silk of her dress. You are the answer to a question I have asked every night for a decade. You are the face in my dreams. He said it with such absolute conviction that Clara's protest died in her throat. The mate bond? She had heard tales, of course, the mystical, unbreakable connection predestined by the moon goddess. But it was a fairy tale for lucky alphas and lunas, not for broken omegas sold for cash. Yet the paintings, the way he looked at her, not with lust or cruelty, but with a recognition that shook him to his core. It's not possible, she whispered, shaking her head. I'm nobody, an omega who can't even shift fully. My wolf is a whisper, a ghost. Then she is a ghost who has haunted a king, Lysander said, his voice softening in a way that seemed to surprise even him. He looked her over, truly seeing her now, the shivering, the mud-cocked hem of her dress, the bruises on her arm that were darkening from Cale's grip. A low growl, pure menace, reverberated in his chest. And you are freezing. In one swift, effortless motion, he bent and scooped her up into his arms. Clara yelped, her hands flying to his shoulders for balance. He held her like she weighed nothing, cradled against the solid wall of his chest. He was terrifyingly strong. What are you doing? Put me down. You are cold and you are hurt, he said simply, as if stating an immutable fact of the universe. He carried her out of the library, down the corridor, and into a private elevator she hadn't seen. He took her not to a servant's quarters, but to what could only be his personal suite. It was a vast space of stone, glass, and dark wood, sparsely furnished, but radiating a sense of immense solitary power. A fire crackled in a hearth big enough to stand in. He carried her straight through into a bathroom that took her breath away. It was carved from the same dark stone as the cliff, with a wide, sunken pool of steaming water fed by a natural hot spring that trickled down a rock wall. He set her carefully on her feet by the edge of the pool, but kept a steadying hand on her elbow. The water will warm you. There are salts that will soothe the bruises. He turned to leave, then paused, his back to her. No one will enter. You are safe here. He left, closing a heavy door behind him. Clara stood alone, the steam coiling around her. Safe. The word echoed in the luxurious cavern. Was she? She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, her fate tied to a man more legend than human. He spoke of destiny and dreams, but beneath his words, she heard the unspoken truth. A war was coming, a war over her, and her brothers, who thought they had solved a problem, had instead lit the fuse on a powder keg that could shatter the entire balance of power in the territory. And somewhere in the storm-lashed night, the agents of the Iron Fang Syndicate would be reporting to their true master, Victor Moro, that their payment, a unique violet-eyed Omega, had been delivered to Lysander Vane. They would not be happy she was gone. They would come for what they considered theirs. Sleep, when it finally came, was not restful. It was filled with swirling images, painted eyes that watched her, Kale's triumphant smile as he drove away, and the silver, penetrating gaze of the Alpha King waiting for her in the darkness.
Clara woke to silence. Not the empty silence of the farmhouse, but a deep, profound quiet, broken only by the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth and the distant, eternal sigh of the waterfall beyond the glass wall of her room. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was a cloud of linen and down, the room a cavern of stone and soft gray morning light. Then memory returned, crashing in like the tide. The bridge, the paintings, Lysander's silver eyes. She sat up, the luxurious robe still wrapped around her. She was in the Alpha King's private wing, a prisoner, a ward, a ghost made flesh. She didn't know what she was. A soft knock sounded at the inner door. Before she could answer, it opened. A woman entered, older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and salt and pepper hair swept into a severe bun. She wore a simple, dark dress and carried a tray. "Good morning, Miss Vance. I am Ilara, the head of household." Her voice was cool, professional, devoid of either warmth or hostility. She set the tray on a table. It held a pot of tea, toast, fruit, and eggs. "Alpha Vane requested you be allowed to rest. He is occupied with pack business, but wishes to see you this afternoon." "See me for what?" Clara asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "That is not my purview," Ilara replied. She gestured to a wardrobe that stood open against the wall. "You will find clothing there. Suitable attire has been provided. I will return in 1 hour to escort you." She left as silently as she came. Clara approached the wardrobe with trepidation. Inside were clothes of beautiful, understated quality. Soft wool trousers, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, all in neutral tones of gray, charcoal, cream, and deep cream. Nothing ostentatious, but everything whispered of immense wealth and refined taste. There were no dresses like the one she had been forced into. These were clothes for moving, for living. She chose a pair of dark trousers and a cream-colored sweater that was softer than anything she had ever touched. They fit as if they were made for her. The simplicity of them made her feel less like an imposter. True to her word, Ilara returned. "This way." She led Clara not back through the main parts of the citadel, but through a series of smaller, private corridors and another elevator. They emerged into a part of the area Clara hadn't seen, a vast, glass-enclosed conservatory built into the cliff face. It was a jungle of greenery, with a stone path winding through ferns and exotic flowers. The air was warm and humid, smelling of earth and blossom. And at the center, by a koi pond, stood Lysander. He was dressed similarly to the day before, in dark, functional clothing, but he seemed different in the daylight. No less powerful, but the sharp edges of his intensity were momentarily softened by the green tranquility around him. He was studying the water, his profile stark against the vibrant leaves. Ilara melted away. Clara stood uncertainly at the entrance to the garden path. "Come," he said without turning. "The fish are not dangerous." She walked toward him, her steps quiet on the stone. He finally looked at her as she approached, his silver gaze sweeping over her, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "The clothes suit you." "Thank you." She hesitated. "This place, it's beautiful." "It is a retreat," he said, turning his attention back to the pond. "A place to remember that not all power is about force. Some of it is about cultivation, patience." He glanced at her.
Your brother, Kale, he lacks patience and foresight. The mention of Kale was a dash of cold water. What does that mean? It means the Iron Fang Institution is not a forgiving institution. They accepted a unique asset as payment for a debt. They will expect to collect that asset or be compensated far beyond its stated value. He picked up a small container of fish food, sprinkling a pinch on the water. The colorful koi swarmed in a silent, graceful frenzy. Your brothers have not simply stolen from me. They have stolen from Victor Moro, and Moro is a man who collects what is owed to him, always. A new fear, cold and slake, coiled in her stomach. They'll come for me. They will come, Lysander confirmed, his voice flat. But they will not find a frightened Omega in a rotting farmhouse. They will find the Aerie and me. You would go to war? Over me? The concept was ludicrous, terrifying. I would go to war over a principle, he corrected, though his eyes held hers. Shadowcrest does not deal in flesh. That my name was used to facilitate such a transaction is an insult. That it brought you here, he paused, choosing his words with care, that is a separate matter. But the insult must be answered. Moro will be made to understand that what enters my territory becomes mine to protect. Mine. The word hung in the humid air. It wasn't spoken with possession, but with a stark, unyielding certainty that was somehow more absolute. You keep saying that, Clara whispered, that I'm yours, that the moon goddess intended this, but I don't feel anything. No bond, no recognition. It was a brave thing to say to him, and she expected anger. Instead, he looked thoughtful. The bond is not a switch, it is a seed. It requires the right conditions to grow. Trust, safety, time. You have had none of those things. Your wolf is buried deep, traumatized. She will not emerge to meet a king if she is still flinching from her own brothers. His perception was unnerving. He saw too much. So what do you want from me then? She asked, a hint of defiance she'd buried for years surfacing. If I'm not a servant, what is my role here? To be your dream come to life? A living painting in your gallery? For the first time, she saw a flicker of true emotion beyond intensity or anger, a flash of what might have been pain. It was gone in an instant. I want you to heal, he said, his voice low. I want you to eat food that nourishes you, to sleep without fear, to walk in a garden and not wonder if you will be struck for enjoying it. When you are no longer a creature of pure survival, then we will discover your role. It was not the answer she expected. It was a promise of peace, offered by the most warlike man she had ever known. Before she could formulate a response, a chime sounded softly in the air. Lysander's head tilted, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. The council is convening, he said, his demeanor shifting back to that of the Alpha. You will accompany me. To a pack council? I can't. I'm not Shadowcrest. They will see what I wish them to see. You are under my protection. That is all they need to know. Come. He didn't wait for agreement. He simply expected obedience. After a lifetime of giving it under threat, Clara found herself giving it now out of a confused mix of fear and a desperate, fragile curiosity. The council chamber was as imposing as the rest of the Aerie, a large, round, circular room with a wall of glass overlooking the misty valley. A large, crescent-shaped table of black wood dominated the space. About 20 wolves were already present, taking their seats. They were all powerful, radiating the confidence of high-ranking pack members. Their conversations died when Lysander entered, and every eye went first to him, then too, with undisguised shock and scrutiny, to Clara. She felt smaller than ever, a mouse in a room of hawks. Lysander guided her not back through the main parts of the citadel, but through a series of smaller, private corridors and another elevator. They emerged into a part of the Aerie Clara hadn't seen, a vast glass-enclosed conservatory built into the cliff face. It was a jungle of greenery, with a stone path winding through ferns and exotic flowers. The air was warm and humid, smelling of earth and blossom. And at the center, by a koi pond, stood Lysander. He was dressed similarly to the day before, in dark, functional clothing, but he seemed different in the daylight. No less powerful, but the sharp edges of his intensity were momentarily softened by the green tranquility around him. He was studying the water, his profile stark against the vibrant leaves. Ilara melted away. Clara stood uncertainly at the entrance to the garden path. "Come," he said without turning. "The fish are not dangerous." She walked toward him, her steps quiet on the stone. He finally looked at her as she approached, his silver gaze sweeping over her, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "The clothes suit you." "Thank you," she hesitated. "This place, it's beautiful." "It is a retreat," he said, turning his attention back to the pond. "A place to remember that not all power is about force. Some of it is about cultivation, patience." He glanced at her. "Your brother, Kale, he lacks patience and foresight." The mention of Kale was a dash of cold water. "What does that mean?" "It means the Iron Fang Institution is not a forgiving institution. They accepted a unique asset as payment for a debt. They will expect to collect that asset or be compensated far beyond its stated value." He picked up a small container of fish food, sprinkling a pinch on the water. The colorful koi swarmed in a silent, graceful frenzy. "Your brothers have not simply stolen from me, they have stolen from Victor Moro. And Moro is a man who collects what is owed to him. Always." A new fear, cold and slick, coiled in her stomach. "They'll come for me." "They will come," Lysander confirmed, his voice flat. "But they will not find a frightened Omega in a rotting farmhouse. They will find the heir."
The afternoon bled away into a tense, watchful evening. Clara stayed in the suite, the immense space feeling both like a sanctuary and a prison. Ilara brought her dinner, her face a mask of professional detachment that revealed nothing. The food was exquisite, but Clara could only pick at it, her stomach knotted with anxiety. The citadel, so silent before, now seemed to hum with a low-grade energy, boots on distant stone, murmured voices over comms, the occasional sharp bark of an order. Lysander did not return. As dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and iron gray, Clara found herself drawn again to the window. The view was a majestic, indifferent landscape of cliffs and endless forest. Somewhere in that vastness, a border had been crossed. A line had been drawn in blood. A soft knock, different from Ilara's firm rap. It was hesitant. Clara turned as the door opened just enough for a young woman to slip inside. She looked to be about Clara's age, with kind brown eyes and a nervous smile. She carried a stack of folded linens. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to intrude," the girl whispered, her eyes wide. "Ilara sent me with fresh towels for the bathing pool. She's occupied." Clara nodded, taking a step back to give her space. The girl moved quickly, placing the towels on a shelf. She seemed in a hurry to leave, but her eyes kept darting to Clara with a mix of fear and intense curiosity. "You're her, aren't you?" the girl finally blurted out, then clapped a hand over her mouth. "I'm sorry, that was rude. I'm Anya. I work in the laundry." "I'm Clara." The simple introduction felt strange. "I know," Anya said, her voice dropping even lower. She glanced at the door. "Everyone knows. They're saying all sorts of things. That you're a witch who enchanted the Alpha, that you're a spy, that you're his long-lost cousin." She shook her head. "Ignore them. Most of us, we just do our jobs. We don't see the Alpha much. But the way he brought you here, it's not normal for him." "What is normal for him?" Clara asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Anya hugged herself. "Distance, control, like the mountains out there. You know they're there, you know they're powerful, but you don't touch them." She bit her lip. "There was an incident tonight at the East Ridge. Iron Fang mercenaries. They killed the Sentinels. Not just killed, they displayed them." Clara's blood ran cold. "Displayed them?" Anya nodded, her face pale. "As a message. They used silver chains.
Everyone's on edge. Darian and his faction are saying it's a declaration of war because of you, that the Alpha is putting the whole pack at risk for an outsider. She took a step closer, genuine worry in her eyes. Just be careful. Not everyone in these walls is your friend. Before Clara could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the outer corridor. Anya's eyes went wide with panic. I have to go. She scurried out like a startled rabbit, closing the door silently just as the main door to the suite opened. Lysander entered. He was still dressed from the day, but his clothes were dusted with a fine gray ash, and there was a grim set to his jaw that hadn't been there before. He smelled of cold wind, pine smoke, and the sharp, coppery tang of blood. He didn't speak at first. He went to the sideboard and poured a glass of water, drinking it in one long swallow. When he turned, his silver eyes found her in the dim light. They were haunted, not by fear, but by a cold, limitless fury. You heard, he stated. A little, Clara admitted, her voice small. Was it because of me? He set the glass down with a soft click. It was because Victor Morrow believes he can take what is mine. The why is irrelevant to him, only the how. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of fatigue. They were young, the Sentinels, barely more than boys. They fought well, but they were outnumbered and outfitted with weapons designed for our kind. Silver, Clara whispered, Anya's words about chains returning to her. And worse, Lysander said, his voice a low growl. Morrow has chemists. He creates abominations, poisons that induce permanent paralysis, gases that cause a wolf to tear itself apart from the inside during a shift. He looked at her, and the fury in his eyes was now mixed with something else, a desperate need for her to understand. This is the world your brothers sold you into, Clara, not a world of simple cruelty, a world of calculated technological evil. The weight of it pressed down on her. She had been a burden, a debt payment. She had never considered being a pawn in a war between giants. What happens now? Now, he said, walking toward the fireplace and staring into the flames, Morrow has made his move. I must make mine. He wants to provoke me into an open battle on his terms, in the forest where his tricks and traps are most effective. I will not give him that. What will you do? A ghost of a smile, cold and ruthless, touched his lips. I will remind him why I am the alpha of this territory. He believes he's hunting wolves. He will find he has awakened a dragon. The ancient primal power in his words sent a shiver through her that was not entirely fear. You're going to kill him. I am going to dismantle him, he corrected, piece by piece, starting with the traitors within my own borders who facilitated your accomplishment. The meeting with your brothers was arranged by someone. Morrow's man, Julian, did not simply stumble upon two drunken fools in a bar. He was pointed in their direction. There's a leak in Shadowcrest, a sympathizer or a paid informant. The idea was somehow more frightening than an external enemy. Who? That, he said, his gaze turning inward, calculating, is what I must discover, and you will help me. Me? How could I possibly help? You know the players, your brothers, their habits, their vices. You have seen the underbelly of Silvermane. You know the scent of desperation and greed. He approached her, stopping a few feet away. I will have Silas bring you maps, dossiers, transaction records. You will look for connections I cannot see, patterns that my enforcers, who think in terms of strength and territory, might miss. It was the last thing she expected, not to be hidden away, but to be used, to be given a purpose within the storm. A fragile spark ignited in her chest, fighting back the helplessness. You trust me with that? I trust no one, he said bluntly, but I recognize a resource. You have a mind that has survived by noticing every detail, predicting every mood. That is a skill. We will use it. He was not offering comfort. He was offering a weapon. And in that moment, it felt more honest than any promise of protection. She nodded slowly. I'll try. Good. He studied her for a moment longer, the intensity in his gaze softening a fraction. The night will be long. The Citadel is on lockdown. You will remain here. Silas will be outside your door." He turned to leave, the discussion seemingly over, but Clara found her voice again. "Lysander." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "The sentinels, the boys. I'm sorry." For a long moment, he was silent. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them. When he spoke, his voice was gravel rough. "So am I." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. True to his word, Silas arrived an hour later with a tablet and several old-fashioned paper files. His demeanor was all business. "Alpha's orders. These are sanitized dossiers on known Iron Fang associates, financial trails linked to the syndicate's shell companies, and a map of the border regions. Cross-reference any names you recognize from Silvermane, any locations your brothers frequented. Look for anomalies." He left her with the materials. Clara sat at the large desk, the glow of the tablet illuminating her face in the dark room. It felt surreal. Yesterday, she was scrubbing floors. Today, she was analyzing intelligence for a wolf king. She started with the map, tracing the jagged line that separated Shadowcrest from the unclaimed lands where the Iron Fang Syndicate operated. Her fingers stopped at a marked location, the Rusty Anchor, a notorious bar outside formal pact jurisdiction. Her brothers had gone there sometimes, returning with empty wallets and black eyes. She made a note. She opened the dossiers. Faces and names blurred together, ruthless men and women with empty eyes. Then she stopped. A familiar name jumped out, not from the dossiers, but from a list of recent authorized trade permits issued by the Shadowcrest quartermaster. The permit was for medical supplies, bound for a remote outpost. The approving signature was a flowing, elegant script. Lydia Sterling. Lydia, who had sneered at her today. Lydia, whose brother Darian had challenged her presence. A trade permit for bandages and antiseptic wasn't suspicious, but the timing was. It was issued the day after Clara's brothers had first made contact with the Iron Fang intermediary, according to the timeline Silas had provided. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Clara's survival had depended on noticing coincidences. She noted it, her heart beating a little faster. Hours passed. She found more tiny threads. A Shadowcrest guard who had been disciplined for gambling debt a year before, whose cousin was a known smuggler in Iron Fang employ. A supply route that had been subtly altered 2 months prior, moving patrols further from
The Citadel, which had hummed with tension before, now seemed to hold its breath. Clara stood by the window, watching as the pale dawn bled into a grim, overcast day. The waterfall's roar was the only constant sound, a reminder of the immense, indifferent power of this place. Inside, a different kind of power was being summoned, the power of judgment. She replayed her notes in her mind, a date, a signature, a diverted supply route. It was all circumstantial, threads she had tugged on without knowing what tapestry they were part of. But Lysander had seen the pattern instantly. He had seen the treason. A part of her, the part that had survived by being invisible, trembled. She had made an enemy of someone with influence, someone like Lydia. Another part, a newer, raw part, felt a grim satisfaction. If Lydia had helped Iron Fang, if she had a hand in the deaths of those young sentinels, then she deserved what was coming. The door opened, and Clara spun around, expecting Silas or Lysander. It was Anya again, her face pale as fresh milk, carrying a breakfast tray. Her hands shook so badly the china cup rattled on its saucer. "Anya? What's wrong?" The girl set the tray down hastily, spilling a little tea. "They took her," Anya whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "Guards came for Lydia Sterling before first light. They walked her right through the lower halls. She wasn't fighting. She was smiling. It was awful. And her brother, Darian, he's confined to his quarters. The whole east wing is sealed off. They're saying she sold information to the syndicate, that she pointed the wolves to your brothers." Clara's stomach twisted. "Because of me? Because of what I found?" Anya shook her head fiercely. "No, because of what she did.
Everyone knows the Sterlings have been bitter since Alpha Vane passed over Darien for head of security last year. They wanted more power. Lydia, she always thought she'd be the Alpha's chosen consort. She wrung her hands. But to work with Iron Fang? To get our own people killed? There's no forgiveness for that. The Alpha will call for the blood price. The blood price. Clara had heard the term in grim stories, the ultimate penalty for betrayal of the pack. What will happen? Clara asked, though she feared she knew the answer. The Alpha will judge, in the stone circle, today. Anya's voice dropped to a terrified hush. The whole pack is summoned to bear witness at noon. After Anya scurried away, Clara was left with a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weather. She had wanted to help stop the violence, not summon a different kind. The day crawled by. Alara came once, her face an even more impenetrable mask, to collect the untouched tray. She offered no news, no comfort. Just before noon, the door opened again. It was Lysander. He had changed into formal attire, a black military-style tunic with silver fastenings, his shoulders seeming broader, his presence more immense. His face was a carved monument of cold authority. Only his eyes, when they found hers, held a flicker of something else, an acknowledgement of her role in this. "Come," he said. "I shouldn't. This is pack justice. I'm an outsider. You are the reason this treason was uncovered. You will witness the consequence." His tone brooked no argument. "It is not a pleasant sight, but it is necessary. A pack survives on trust. A breach of that trust is a cancer. It must be cut out, publicly, so all can see the cost." He led her down to the heart of the citadel, to a place she hadn't seen. It was an ancient, open-air courtyard carved directly into the mountain's peak, ringed by towering, weathered stone monoliths, the stone circle. The wind here was a biting whip, carrying the scent of snow and ancient rock. The entire adult population of Shadowcrest seemed to be there, hundreds of them, arrayed on stone benches that rose in tiers around the central clearing. They were utterly silent. The air thrummed with a solemn, dreadful gravity. In the center of the circle, standing alone, was Lydia Sterling. She was still dressed in her fine clothes, her platinum hair pulled back severely. She held her head high, but Clara could see the fine tremor in her hands. Her brother, Darien, stood at the edge of the circle, flanked by two stern-faced enforcers, his face a storm of fury and shame. Lysander guided Clara to a seat of honor at the very front, beside the empty Alpha stone chair. Every eye in the place followed them, the weight of their collective gaze crushing. He left her there and walked to the center, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He did not look at Lydia at first. He addressed the pack, his voice carrying effortlessly on the wind, clear and hard as the stone around them. "We gather in the site of our ancestors, in the place of truth," he began. "Last night, wolves of Shadowcrest died. They were betrayed, not from a stranger, but from one who ate at our table, who wore our mark." He turned his mercury gaze on Lydia. "Lydia Sterling, you are accused of conspiring with the enemy, the Iron Fang Syndicate, of providing intelligence that led to the deaths of pack sentinels, of facilitating the illegal trade of a living soul under Shadowcrest protection. How do you answer?" Lydia lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly strong, laced with a defiant bitterness. "I answer that I acted for the good of Shadowcrest. This pack was strong, pure, feared, and then she came, a weak, pathetic Omega from a dung-heap pack, and you, Alpha, you lost your mind. You gave her your protection. You dishonored the traditions. You put her above loyal-born wolves. You are weakening us from within. I sought an alliance with a power that understands strength. Victor Morrow understands the value of assets." A horrified murmur swept through the crowd. She had not denied it. She had justified it. "An alliance. Lysander's voice was dangerously quiet. "You call the slaughter of our young an alliance. You call selling a living soul to a blood dealer acting for the pack's good?" "I was trying to remove a corruption," Lydia shrieked, her composure cracking. "She is the corruption. I saw the paintings. I know you dream of her. It's a sickness. I was trying to cure you, to cure us all." The admission hung in the air, stark and insane. She hadn't done it just for power. She had done it out of a twisted, jealous belief that she was saving her alpha and her pack from Clara's influence. Lysander stared at her, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of something like pity in his eyes, quickly buried beneath the ice. "Your confession is heard. Your reasoning is the reasoning of a mind poisoned by envy and ambition. You have broken the highest law. You have shed the blood of your pack." He turned to the assembly. "The pack bears witness. The crime is treason. The penalty is death." He looked at Darian, whose face was contorted in agony. "Does the family of the accused contest the judgment or claim the right of combat?" Darian's shoulders slumped. He shook his head once, a sharp, agonized movement. He could not defend her actions. The pack's collective will was a tangible force, and it condemned her. Lysander nodded. He turned back to Lydia. "By the laws of our ancestors, by the will of the pack, your life is forfeit. Your name will be struck from our records. Your memory will carry only the mark of the traitor." He did not touch her. He simply raised his hand, a gesture to the guards. 2 enforcers stepped forward. They did not drag her. They simply escorted her, walking steadily, out of the stone circle and through an archway that led to the sheer cliff face. The pack watched in dead silence. Clara wanted to look away, but she felt compelled to witness, to understand the full weight of the world she was now entangled in. This was not the hot, messy violence of her brother's drunken rages. This was cold, ritual, and infinitely more terrible. A moment later, a single sharp cry was torn away by the wind, then nothing. Justice in Shadowcrest was swift and final. Lysander addressed the pack once more, his voice still hard, but now carrying a note of grim unity. "The cancer is cut out. Let the wound heal cleanly. Look to your alpha, not to whispers or promises from the dark. Our strength is in our unity. Our law is in our loyalty. To Shadowcrest." 1,000 voices rose in a thunderous, guttural response that shook the stones underfoot. To Shadowcrest. The assembly began to disperse, the mood somber but resolved. The pack had purged its weakness. Lysander walked back to where Clara sat, frozen in her seat. He looked down at her, his face unreadable. "You see the price of betrayal," he said. "It is not a gentle thing." "She said she was trying to save me," Clara whispered, her voice hoarse. "She was trying to save her own vision of what I should be," he corrected. "A vision that had no room for destiny, for the mysteries of the moon goddess, only for cold, controllable power." He offered her his hand. "Come, it is done." She took his hand, her own icy. As they walked back inside, away from the biting wind and the memory of Lydia's final defiant stare, Clara felt a shift. The internal threat had been named and destroyed, but it had... The silence after the execution was a living thing, thick and heavy. In the Alpha's wing, the only sounds were the fire and Clara's own restless pacing. Lysander's plan was a cold, precise machine, and she was a reluctant gear within it. Using her brothers as bait felt like pouring salt on a wound that had never truly closed. Silas arrived as dusk began to stain the sky. He carried no files this time, only a focused intensity. "The brothers are being held in the lower detention block," he reported to Lysander, who stood like a statue before the window. "They're terrified, convinced they'll be next for the stone circle. They've been babbling, offering money, information, anything." "What information?" Lysander asked, not turning. "Mostly useless. Tavern gossip, Silvermane grievances. but they confirmed the initial contact was through a man named Julian, as we suspected. They also let slip that Morrow was... Silas glanced at Clara, a flicker of unease in his calm demeanor. He was intensely specific about acquiring Miss Vance. It wasn't a random debt collection. He demanded the violet-eyed Omega by description. He knew what he was buying. Lysander finally turned, his silver gaze landing on Clara. He knew what you were, or suspected it. Lydia's treachery gave him the how, but the what he already wanted. He walked to his desk, tapping a finger on the polished wood. We move tonight. The Sterling's disgrace will be public knowledge by now. Morrow will know his inside source is gone. He will be agitated, making decisions from emotion rather than strategy. We will give him an opportunity he cannot resist. He outlined the plan. It was audacious. The Vance brothers would be allowed to escape. A conveniently unguarded door, a distracted patrol, and a truck with the keys left in the ignition near the perimeter fence. They would flee, believing they had outsmarted the mighty Shadowcrest, and they would run straight to the only person they believed could protect them now, Victor Morrow. They will offer him a trade, Lysander said, his voice low. Their freedom in exchange for the location of a critical vulnerability. They will tell him that Clara, shaken by the execution and the pack's unrest, is being moved tonight to a secure lodge deep in the forest with only a minimal guard. A perfect opportunity for a snatch and grab. Clara listened, her arms wrapped around her. It was one thing to analyze files. It was another to be a living piece of deception in a lethal game. And my brothers, what happens to them when they lead Morrow to the trap? Lysander's expression was merciless. That will depend on Morrow. If he is suspicious, he may kill them as loose ends the moment they deliver their information. If he is greedy and overconfident, he may bring them along. Their fate is in their own hands now. They chose their path. The words were final. There would be no rescue for Cale and Lorcan. They were expendable pieces in Lysander's strategy. She found she could not muster the grief she thought she should feel. There was only a hollow acceptance and a chilling understanding of the Alpha King's world. Every move had a cost, and sentiment was a luxury paid for blood. The next few hours were a blur of quiet, efficient preparation. Clara was dressed in a dark hooded coat. She saw, from her window, a nondescript black SUV being prepared in the courtyard below. The Citadel's normal rhythms continued, but beneath the surface, it was a coiled spring. Just as full darkness settled, Ilara came for her. "It is time, Miss Vance." They walked through back corridors to a side entrance. Lysander was there, a commanding shadow. He didn't speak, only looked at her, his gaze a silent question. "Are you ready?" She gave a slight, tense nod. He opened the SUV's rear door. Silas was already in the driver's seat. "The decoy route is set. We have eyes confirming the brothers have escaped and are making for the border. All secondary units are in position." "Go," Lysander said. He closed the door, his hand resting on the roof for a fleeting second before stepping back. The vehicle pulled away, slipping into the night like a black fish into dark water. Clara sat in the back, watching the imposing silhouette of the Aerie shrink behind them. She was playing her part, but as the forest swallowed them, a primal fear, deeper than any she had felt on the bridge, began to stir. She was being taken into the dark, toward a promised ambush. What if the trap failed? What if Morrow was smarter, had more men, different weapons? What if she was once again just a thing being delivered? Meanwhile, in the dank, cold detention block, Cale and Lorcan Vance huddled together. The door to their cell, which had been securely locked an hour ago, now stood slightly ajar. They had noticed it 5 minutes past, not daring to believe it. "It's a trick," Lorcan whimpered. "They're waiting to shoot us the moment we step out." "You want to stay and wait for the Alpha to remember us?" Cale hissed, his eyes wild. "After what he did to that Sterling woman? We're dead if we stay." He peered through the crack. The corridor was empty. The guard who had been posted was gone, his half-eaten meal still on a stool. Now, move! They slithered out, hearts hammering, expecting alarms to blare. Nothing. They found a service door unlocked leading to a loading bay, and there, like a gift from the moon itself, was an old maintenance truck, the keys dangling from the ignition. "It's too easy," Lorcan panted as they scrambled inside. "It's our only chance," Cale snarled, firing up the engine. He didn't wait for the headlights, just threw the truck into gear and sped down the rough service road, away from the terrifying citadel. They drove for an hour. Fear and elation made them giddy. They had outsmarted Shadowcrest. They were free. "We can't go home," Lorcan said, the reality dawning. "Silvermane will hand us right back to them, or Morrow's men will be waiting for us." Cale's mind, always scheming, whirred. "We need a new deal, a better one. We have information, valuable information." "What information? We're nobodies." "We saw her. We know the Alpha is obsessed with her, and we heard the guards talking after that execution. They're moving her tonight. Some safe house in the woods, light guard. That's our ticket. We go to Morrow, we tell him where his prize will be vulnerable. He gets the girl, he gets his revenge on Vane, and he lets us go with enough money to disappear forever." It was a desperate, stupid plan, but it was the only one they had. Driven by a potent mix of terror and greed, they turned the truck toward the last place they had met Julian, the Ironfang liaison, praying they could find him before Shadowcrest found them. Deep in a fortified compound in the lawless borderlands, Victor Morrow received the news of Lydia Sterling's death. He was a man who appreciated elegance, and he was sipping a rare brandy when the report came. He didn't rage. He simply set the glass down, his pale, scarred face expressionless. "A setback," he murmured to his second-in-command, an hulking man named Granger. "The Wolf King has purged his house. He will be feeling strong, insoluble." A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. That is when he will be most vulnerable to a surprise. A guard entered. "Sir, the Vance brothers are here. They say they've escaped Shadowcrest. They have information. They demand to speak to you." Morrow's eyebrow lifted. "The Sellers return. How fortuitous. Bring them in. Let us hear what misfortune has to say." Cale and Lorcan were dragged in, filthy and shaking. They spilled their story, the accidental overheard conversation, the move to the remote lodge, the light security. They offered it like a priceless gem. Morrow listened, steepling his fingers. He believed their fear was genuine. He believed they were too stupid to concoct such a simple, tempting story. And he believed in his own arrogance. Lysander Vane was a beast of instinct and strength. A tactical relocation after an internal crisis made perfect sense, a show of moving his precious new treasure to a safer location. It was exactly the kind of direct, physical thinking Morrow expected from a wolf. "A lodge in the Blackroot Valley," Morrow mused, consulting a map. "Isolated, accessible by only one road. Perfect for an ambush." He looked at the cowering brothers. "You have done well. You will lead my team to the location. If your information is good, you will be rewarded. If it is a trap—" He let the sentence hang, the unspoken threats more potent than any shout. Cale and Lorcan nodded eagerly, too relieved to be alive to see the deadly calculation in Morrow's eyes. To him, they were already dead men, useful idiots to be disposed of after they served their purpose. Back at the hunting lodge, Clara waited. The room was indeed secure, windowless, with a steel-reinforced door. Silas was outside. She could hear the faint sounds of Shadowcrest warriors taking up concealed positions in the surrounding forest. The air was cold and still, thick with the scent of pine and impending violence. Lysander was out there somewhere, a phantom in the trees. She had never felt more alone, yet more acutely aware of the network of power and protection that surrounded her. She was the heart of the trap, the still, silent center around which the storm would break. She thought of her brothers, running blindly into Morrow's grasp. She thought of The silence in the forest was absolute. It was the deep, watchful quiet of a predator holding its breath. Clara sat in the pitch black of the safe room, every sense straining. She heard nothing from Silas. The lodge around her felt like a tomb. Then a distant crunch of gravel, impossibly loud in the stillness. A vehicle, moving slowly, without lights. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They're here. Outside, in the ink-black woods, Lysander was a part of the shadows. He had shed his human form, not for the massive war-wolf of legend, but for a smaller, sleeker form, a hunter, not a brawler. His fur was the color of midnight smoke, his silver eyes the only points of light in the gloom. Around him, 50 of his best were similarly shifted or lying in human weight, camouflaged, weapons trained on the single road that wound up to the lodge. Through an earpiece, a whisper from a lookout perched high in a pine. 2 vehicles, armored SUVs, stopping at the tree line, 500 meters out. Disembarking, 12 hostiles, tactical gear. They have the Vance brothers with them. Lysander's wolf form let out a silent exhale that fogged in the cold air. The bait had been delivered, now to see if the fish would bite. Victor Morrow's mercenaries moved with professional silence, fanning out toward the lodge. They used thermal scanners, but the Shadowcrest wolves were shielded by special blankets that masked their heat signatures, a technology Lysander had acquired at great cost for exactly this purpose. Cale and Lorcan were shoved to the front, trembling guides. "There," Cale whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the dark shape of the lodge. "That's it. They put her in the back, the most secure room." Morrow, who had stayed in the vehicle, observed through a command tablet fed by his men's helmet cams. He saw a quiet, seemingly undefended building. It felt too quiet. A worm of doubt squirmed in his gut, but the prize was so close. The arrogance that had brought him this far overruled his caution. He spoke into his comms. Team 1, breach and secure the asset. Team 2, perimeter sweep. Be quick. Team 1, 6 men, moved toward the front door. Team 2 fanned out around the sides of the building. Inside the lodge, Silas heard the subtle scuff of boots on the wooden porch. He stood behind a reinforced interior wall, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm. His job was not to engage, but to protect the door to Clara's room until the signal was given. The front door exploded inward, not with a kick, but with a shaped charge that blew the lock with a deafening crump. The mercenaries poured in, rifles sweeping the dark main room. Clear! Clear! They moved with practiced efficiency toward the hallway where Silas waited. That was the signal. From the woods, Lysander gave a low, almost inaudible growl. It was picked up by amplifiers and transmitted as a single, soft click in the earpieces of every Shadowcrest warrior. The trap sprang. Team 2, circling the lodge, never saw what hit them. Shadows detached from the trees, moving with impossible speed. There were no roars, no battle cries, just the sickening, efficient sounds of close-quarters takedowns, suppressed gunshots, the wet thud of blades, the brief, choked-off gurgles. The forest swallowed the violence in seconds. Inside, the lead mercenary rounded the corner and came face-to-face with Silas. The Shadowcrest Beta didn't fire, he simply smiled, a cold, terrifying sight, and ducked back as the ceiling above the hallway collapsed. It wasn't an explosion, it was a cascade of heavy, silver-linked nets, weighted and designed to entangle and burn. The mercenaries screamed as the metal touched their skin, the silver searing through their gear. They were trapped, writhing in the hallway. Outside, hearing the screams from his men, Morrow swore. "It's an ambush. Fall back to the vehicles." But the vehicles were no longer there. Shadowcrest operatives had silently disabled them the moment the mercenaries had moved out. Morrow's command SUV was now a metal coffin. Panic erupted among the remaining Iron Fang men. They fired wildly into the trees, muzzle flashes lighting up the nightmare scene in strobes. They saw nothing to shoot at. Then the wolves came. They didn't attack as a mob, they struck in precise, coordinated pairs, taking down one mercenary at a time, vanishing back into the darkness before retaliatory bursts could be aimed. It was less a battle than a slaughter, a demonstration of why Shadowcrest ruled these mountains. But Lysander had a different target. He shifted back to human form behind the cover of a thick spruce, pulling on a pair of dark pants and a shirt left for him. He wanted Moro to see his face. He walked calmly out of the tree line into the small clearing where the SUVs were parked. The firefight was dying behind him, the last few mercenaries being subdued. In the center, surrounded by 3 of his bodyguards, was Victor Moro. The man looked older in person, his elegant suit incongruous in the muddy chaos. His eyes, a flat, soulless gray, locked onto Lysander. Cale and Lorcan were cowering by the disabled lead SUV. They saw Lysander and whimpered, trying to make themselves smaller. Victor Moro, Lysander's voice carried across the clearing. You are in my territory, attacking my people, seeking to steal what is mine. You have no more cards to play. Moro's face twitched, but he held on to his composure. This changes nothing, Vane. You have won a skirmish. The war is larger. The interest in the girl is considerable, more considerable than you can imagine. You are a regional power. I answer to a global one. What interest? Lysander demanded, taking a step closer. The bodyguards raised their weapons, but their hands were shaking. What is so special about 1 Omega? A strange, fanatical light entered Moro's eyes. You don't even know, do you? You have a star in your vault and think it's a pretty rock. The Violet strain isn't just a fairy tale, Wolf King. It's a genetic key. Her blood, her lineage, it can unlock potentials, stabilize unstable genetic codes, for wolves and for others. My client has been searching for a viable carrier for a century. The words meant little to Clara, listening via a feed Silas had opened for her, but she saw Lysander stiffen. Vampires, he spat the word. Moro shrugged. They prefer the term evolved. They are a dying species, unable to reproduce. A hybrid, stabilized by the Violet strain, it would be a new race, the ultimate predator. And my client is the oldest and hungriest of them all. He will not stop. He will burn your forest, your citadel, and every wolf you have to cinders to get her. You cannot protect her forever. Lysander's fury was a cold, palpable wave. Then I will start by removing his merchant. He took another step. Kill him, Moro barked at his guards. The 3 men fired. Lysander didn't flinch. From the trees, 3 synchronized sniper shots rang out. The bodyguards dropped, dead before they hit the ground. Moro was alone. He backed away, fumbling inside his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a small, sleek injector pen. A final sample, he hissed, his eyes darting toward the lodge. A consolation prize. He wasn't aiming at Lysander. He was aiming at himself. A suicide? No, the injection was clearly meant to alter him, to give him some last desperate advantage. Lysander moved, a blur of motion. But he wasn't the closest one to Moro. Terrified out of his mind, seeing his last hope disintegrating, Cale Vance acted on pure, stupid instinct. To curry favor, to save his own skin, he lunged at Moro, grabbing for the injector. No, you promised us money. There was a struggle. Lorcan screamed. The injector discharged, but not into Moro's neck. The needle, meant for a vampire-altering cocktail, plunged deep into Cale's own thigh as he wrestled with the arms dealer. He gasped, stumbling back. What happened next was horrifying. Cale's body began to convulse violently, his back arched, bones cracking and reknitting with audible snaps. Patchy, mangled fur erupted from his skin. A strangled, half-wolf, half-human shriek tore from his throat. The serum was designed for a completely different physiology. On a wolf, it was a catastrophic poison. He wasn't shifting, he was unraveling. Moro stared, a look of scientific disgust on his face as Cale thrashed on the ground, his form becoming a monstrous, unstable pulp of flesh and fur. The sight was so shocking it froze everyone for a second. It was the opening Moro needed. He turned and ran, not for the woods, but for the lodge itself, pulling a small ceramic pistol from an ankle holster. His goal was clear. If he couldn't have Clara, he would deny her to everyone. "Clara, the door! Do not open it!" Lysander roared, charging after him. But Morrow was closer. He reached the blown-open front door and vanished inside. In the safe room, Clara heard the roar, heard the desperate sprint of boots down the hall. She heard Silas shout, then the sound of a struggle and a body hitting the wall. Heavy footsteps stopped outside her door. "Miss Vance," Morrow's voice slick with false charm came through the steel. "Your brother is dead. Your Alpha is distracted. Open the door. I can offer you more than a life as a wolf's pampered pet. I can offer you a destiny as a queen of a new world." Clara pressed her back against the far wall, trembling. She said nothing. "Very well." A series of rapid, high-pitched beeps. He was placed.
The gray light of dawn found the Blackroot Valley hunting lodge looking like a carcass picked over by giants. Smoke curled from the ruined wall where the beast had burst through. The air stank of cordite, blood, and the strange acidic scent of the failed serum that had consumed Cale Vance. His remains, a shapeless mass of fused tissue, were already being wrapped in a black tarp by somber-faced Shadowcrest warriors. Clara stood outside, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching the cleanup with hollow eyes. The adrenaline had bled away, leaving a numb, cold clarity. She had seen her brother die a grotesque death. She had seen Lysander become a creature of legend and nightmare. She had heard a vampire lord described as a client. Her world, already shattered, had been ground to dust and blown into a terrifying new constellation. Lysander was nearby, dressed now in borrowed fatigues, speaking quietly with Silas. He moved with a stiff, careful grace, as if his bones were still remembering their proper shape. The raw vulnerability she had seen in the wrecked room was gone, locked away behind the mask of the Alpha. But she had seen it. She could not unsee it. Silas finished his report and approached her. "Miss Vance, Lorcan is secured. He's not well, in shock. He keeps repeating that it was all Cale's idea." Clara looked past him to where a young, shell-shocked Lorcan sat on a tree stump, head in his hands, flanked by guards. The brother who had followed, who had been too weak to say no. She felt nothing for him. Not hatred, not pity. He was a stranger. "What will happen to him?" she asked, her voice flat. "That is for the Alpha to decide," Silas said. "But given his diminished capacity and the fact he was largely a follower, exile is the most likely sentence. A life as a rogue, beyond any pack's protection. It was a death sentence of a different kind, slower and lonelier." Lysander walked over. His silver eyes assessed her, checking for injury beyond the physical. "You are unharmed?" She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. You changed into something else." A shadow passed over his face. "The curse of my bloodline, the beast. It is the source of our strength and our doom. My father lost himself to it. I fight it every day. But when I heard the charge on your door..." He trailed off, the memory of that consuming rage still dark in his gaze. "The beast recognizes you. It sees you as an anchor, a tether to humanity. That is why it did not harm you." "Morrow said my blood was a key, the violet strain. What does that mean?" Lysander's jaw tightened. "Old lore. Myths of the first wolves born under a violet moon, said to carry the pure essence of the moon goddess. Their blood was said to have healing properties, to strengthen bonds, to stabilize chaotic forces." He looked at his own hands as if seeing the monster's paws. "I thought they were stories to tell pups, but Morrow was not a man who dealt in fairy tales. He was a merchant of horrors. If he believed it, and if his client believes it, then the lore has a basis in a truth we have forgotten." "A vampire wants my blood to make hybrids," Clara stated, the absurdity of it making her lightheaded. "Not just a vampire," Silas interjected grimly. "Morrow said the oldest and hungriest.
That narrows it down to one of the ancient progenitors. If one of them has taken a personal interest, he left the dread unspoken. "We must return to the Eyrie," Lysander said, his voice taking on the tone of command again. "We are exposed here. The immediate threat is gone, but the larger one has just been unveiled. We need information. We need to understand what you are, Clara, truly." The journey back was made in silence, in a different vehicle. Lorcan was taken in another to his uncertain fate. Clara watched the forest go by, but she didn't see it. She saw Cale's twisting form. She saw the beast's molten eyes. She heard the word anchor. Back in the Citadel, the mood was one of grim victory laced with unease. The pack had triumphed over a formidable enemy, but the costs and the strange revelations hung in the air. Clara was escorted not to the Alpha's wing, but to a set of rooms in the Citadel's secure medical and research level. They were comfortable, even luxurious, but they were clearly designed for observation. The door had a lock on the outside. "For your safety," Alara said, without emotion as she showed her in. "Until the Alpha determines the extent of the new threat, you will have everything you need." Clara didn't argue. She understood. She was no longer just a mysterious Omega or a political complication. She was a strategic asset of unknown value and a magnet for an enemy they could barely comprehend. The gilded cage had been replaced by a laboratory suite. Lysander came to see her that evening. He had bathed and changed and looked more like himself, though the strain around his eyes was pronounced. He carried an ancient, leather-bound book. "I've had our historians and archivists pulling every reference to the violet strain, moon-touched wolves, anything related to amethyst eyes," he said, laying the book on the table. "Most of it is poetic nonsense, but there are fragments, records from 500 years ago of a healer with eyes of twilight who could calm the raging spirit of a berserker alpha. A diary from an explorer who spoke of a remote tribe of wolves whose Luna had violet eyes and whose pack was immune to the blood frenzy." He opened the book to a carefully preserved illustration. It showed a stylized wolf under a violet-hued moon with strange spiraling symbols around it. "This is from a text predating the Great Division. It speaks of the calm in the storm, the tether for the untethered soul, born under the violet days." He looked at her. "My beast is the ultimate raging spirit, Clara, the ultimate untethered soul, and you calm it, not with power, but with presence." Clara touched the ancient paper. "So I'm a living sedative for your family's curse?" "You are a miracle," he said, his voice raw with conviction that startled her. "You are the answer to a prayer I was too bitter to ever utter. For 10 years, you were the dream that kept me sane. Now, you are the reality that might allow me to stay sane." He closed the book. "But this miracle makes you a target. The vampires are a dying race, desperate and ruthless. If they believe your blood can help them breed or grant them stability, they will stop with nothing. Morrow was just a middleman." "What do we do?" The "we" slipped out, surprising her. He heard it. A flicker of something warm and fierce lit his eyes. "We learn. We prepare. My pack's strength is in the physical world. We must now delve into a world of ancient secrets and immortal enemies. And you?" He reached out hesitantly and took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip gentle. "You must learn to connect with the power you have always carried. Your wolf is not weak, Clara. She has been sleeping, hiding. It is time to wake her up." For the first time since she was a child, the idea of her wolf didn't bring shame. It brought a faint, trembling curiosity. "How?" "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin." But that night, as Clara tried to sleep in her new, sterile room, the past reached out its ghostly hand. She dreamed not of fields of flowers, but of her mother, a woman with kind, tired eyes in the same amethyst hue. In the dream, her mother was packing a small bag, her movements frantic. She was whispering, "They must not find her. They must not know. The eyes, they will come for the eyes." She turned to a young Clara, maybe 4 years old, and cupped her face. "You must be small, my love. You must be quiet. Never let your wolf show. Promise me." Clara woke with a gasp, her mother's desperate plea echoing in the silent room. It wasn't a dream, it was a memory of the night her mother had disappeared, never to return. Her mother had known. She had known about the threat, about the they who would come. She had hidden Clara's nature, taught her to suppress her wolf, not from shame, but from protection. Clara sat up in the dark, her heart pounding. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had been running from the very enemy that was now, a generation later, hunting her daughter. The puzzle piece clicked into place with a cold, sickening certainty. The violet strain wasn't just a random genetic fluke. It was a lineage, a hunted lineage, and she was the last one. She had to tell Lysander. But as she moved to get up, a strange sensation washed over her. A cool, serene awareness blossomed in her chest, different from fear, different from curiosity. It felt like moonlight pooling inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt a gentle, whispering presence in the back of her mind, a soft, protective feminine essence, curious and watchful. Her wolf, not a roar, not a snarl, a sigh of awakening. She wasn't just a key or a tether, she was the last daughter of a hidden line, and she was no longer asleep. The game had changed. The memory of her mother's fear was a cold stone in Clara's stomach, but the new sensation, the quiet, moonlit presence in her soul, was a warm ember beside it. For the first time, the hollow ache where her wolf should be was filled, not with roaring power, but with a gentle, watchful awareness. It felt like meeting a sister she never knew she had. When Lysander came for her the next morning, he knew instantly. He stopped in the doorway, his silver eyes widening a fraction as they swept over her. The air in the room seemed to shift, charged with a new, subtle energy. "Something has changed," he stated, his voice hushed. "I remembered," Clara said, her own voice stronger than she expected. "My mother, the night she left, she was afraid of them. She told me to hide, to never let my wolf show. She wasn't ashamed. She was protecting me." Lysander absorbed this, his expression turning grave. "She knew of the threat. She was hiding you." He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. "And your wolf?" Clara closed her eyes for a moment, focusing inward. The presence was there, serene and curious. "She's here. She's awake. She doesn't feel weak. She feels calm, like deep water." A profound relief, so deep it seemed to shake his foundations, flashed across Lysander's face. "Calm," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That is her nature, the eye of the storm. Come." He led her not to a training field or a gym, but back to the ancient stone circle. In the daylight, stripped of the grim ceremony of the execution, it was a place of stark, powerful beauty. The wind still whipped around the monoliths, but today it felt cleansing. "The first shift is the most profound," Lysander said, standing opposite her in the center of the circle. "It is not about force. It is about surrender. You must invite her, not command. Your wolf is not a servant. She is you. Let her rise." Clara stood, feeling small and exposed under the vast sky. She had spent a lifetime building walls against this very moment. Now she had to tear them down. She closed her eyes, pushing away the fear, the memories of her brother's taunts. She focused on the new presence within her, the gentle, luminous essence. "Hello," she thought, not with words, but with feeling. "I'm sorry I kept you hidden." The response was immediate, a wave of warmth, of acceptance, of ancient, patient love. It felt like coming home. She didn't fight the change. She simply allowed it. There was no pain, no wrenching of bones. It was a melting, a flowing. She felt herself soften and reform, not as a violent explosion, but as a quiet bloom. When she opened her eyes, the world was different. Colors were sharper. Smells were a breathtaking tapestry. Pine, snow, rock. the distant musk of deer, the faint metallic scent of the citadel, and overwhelmingly the rich, complex scent of Lysander, frost, pine, iron, and a deep, wild power that called to her on a level she couldn't name. She looked down at herself. Pause. Sleek, silver-gray fur dappled with darker markings like scattered shadows. She was not large or imposing. She was elegant, built for silence and grace. She took a tentative step, the connection to the earth through her pads feeling profoundly right. Lysander had shifted as well. His wolf form was the majestic, powerful black wolf she had seen glimpses of, but he held himself with a careful stillness, watching her. His silver eyes, the same in this form, held a wonder that took her breath away. He approached slowly, lowering his great head. She didn't flinch. He nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, a wolfish gesture of greeting and acknowledgement. A silent conversation passed between them, soul to soul, deeper than language. "You are beautiful," his presence seemed to say. "You are safe," hers replied. For an hour, they simply existed in the circle. He didn't try to teach her to hunt or fight. He led her on a slow walk around the perimeter, letting her get used to the new senses, the new body. Her wolf was calm, observant, intelligent. It felt less like becoming a beast and more like becoming whole. When they shifted back, standing human again in the wind, something between them had solidified. A bond, not the fiery, possessive mate bond of legends, but a deep, serene connection, the anchor finding its rock, the storm finding its calm. "She is perfect," Lysander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am," Clara smiled, a real, unburdened smile that felt strange on her face. "They are." The next days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were spent in the stone circle or in private forest glades, Clara learning to communicate with her wolf, to shift seamlessly, to understand the enhanced senses. Her wolf had no interest in aggression. Her instincts were for protection, healing, and profound perception. She could sense the emotional state of others as a subtle aura, feel the health of the land under her paws. Afternoons were spent in the archives with Lysander and a stern but brilliant elderly historian named Alaric. They scoured the ancient texts, cross-referencing the vague lore with Clara's emerging abilities. They found more fragments, a healer who could see the sickness in the soul, a seer who walked in the dreams of the tormented. The Violet strain was not about physical dominance. It was about empathy, connection, and spiritual balance. It was the counterweight to the Vane family's destructive curse. One evening, a week after her first shift, as Clara and Lysander pored over a fragile scroll in his study, Silas entered. His face was tight. "Alpha, we've intercepted a communication from outside normal channels. It's encrypted with symbols our techs have never seen, but they managed to crack a fragment of the header." Lysander stood. "What did it say?" Silas's gaze flicked to Clara. It was addressed. It said, "To the keeper of the Twilight Daughter." The room went cold. Clara's newfound sense of peace evaporated. Twilight Daughter, a poetic, sinister name for a girl with violet eyes. "The source?" Lysander's voice was deadly quiet. "Untraceable. It bounced through dozens of proxies across the globe. The method is old, pre-digital, almost mystical in its obfuscation. Our expert says it smells of the kind of protocols used by societies that measure their age in millennia, not years." The vampire, the ancient, he was no longer working solely through intermediaries. He was making contact. "What was the message?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the chill in her veins. "The full body is still locked behind layers of encryption we can't break, but the fragment we have is an offer." Silas looked deeply uncomfortable. "It speaks of an exchange, the daughter for the cure of the beast's madness. It claims to hold the secret to permanently stabilizing the Vane bloodline." The air was sucked from the room. Lysander went utterly still, but Clara could feel the storm of conflict erupting within him. The beast was his lifelong burden, his certain doom. A cure. It was the one thing he had never dared hope for. And the price was her. Clara saw the terrible longing, the instant of desperate hope that flashed in his silver eyes, before it was ruthlessly crushed under a wave of protective fury. "No," he growled, the word final. "There is no offer. There is only a threat. Destroy the message, trace it, find its origin." "Alpha," Silas said carefully, "the offer of a cure. The pack elders, if they were to hear of it." "They will not hear of it." His command shook the room. "This is a trick, a manipulation. He seeks to divide us, to make me doubt myself, to make the pack question my judgment. It will not work. She is not a commodity to be traded. She is mine to protect." He turned to Clara, his eyes blazing with a conviction that left no room for argument. "Do you understand? This changes nothing." But it changed everything. The enemy was no longer a distant, vague fear. He had a voice. He had made an offer that struck at the very heart of Lysander's deepest vulnerability. And he had done it in a way that could sow discord within Shadowcrest itself. Clara looked from Lysander's fierce, protective face to the worried frown on Silas's. The ancient, serene presence of her wolf stirred inside her, not with fear, but with a resolute clarity. The vampire wasn't just coming for her. He was trying to weaponize Lysander's love for her and his fear for his people against them. She stood up, drawing both men's attention. The timid Omega from Silvermane was gone. In her place stood a woman with eyes of amethyst, a daughter of a hidden line, an anchor for a king. "He's trying to turn your strength into a weakness," she said, her voice clear and calm. "He thinks your love for your pack and your curse are levers he can pull." She met Lysander's gaze. "We don't destroy the message, Lysander. We answer it." Lysander stared at her, shock etched on his features. "What?" "We answer it," Clara repeated, the plan forming with sudden cool certainty in her mind, guided by her wolf's intuitive wisdom. "We don't accept his offer. We make our own. We don't hide from him. We draw him out.